Well, hey there, idiots. Welcome back to Observe, and in today's video, we're going to be doing the third part of this three-part series where we analyze the nonverbal communication of Prince Andrew in a catastrophe of an interview that he did a while back, in which... it's crazy. It's pretty crazy. Let's go ahead and roll the intro. So like I said, this is technically part 3 of this series, so if you haven't seen the first 2 parts, I suggest you go and watch that and then come back to this one, otherwise you'll be missing some of the stuff. However, I think that is enough of the actual talking. Let's go ahead and finish up this series here.
Epstein's housekeeper, also in a Florida court legal deposition, said that you visited the Palm Beach residence around 4 times a year. You got a daily massage.
4 times a year?
That was what he said in a Florida court legal deposition.
No.
I'm just wondering, when you look back now, is there a...
So I'm just going to go ahead and note that he is saying 4 times a year. His number is not, or his issue is not with the fact that he went, it's with the number of times that he went, which that alone is just like, okay, I mean, but still you were there, and it's still the place that you shouldn't have been, regardless of the number of times. But again, he's doing this overt confusion, it's prolonged and it's extended like this, which makes me believe that it is forced. So we're seeing possibly another point of forced or fake emotion from Prince Andrew. What do you know?
Chance that those massages might have been the services of someone who was being sexually exploited or trafficked by Epstein?
No. I don't think, I mean, no, definitely not.
So what I saw non-verbally in that part was the large hesitation, and this could be considering. So there's a number of things that he could be considering, obviously, but he is considering in that area where there's that pause, so that lets us know that he's thinking about what he's going to say. And then he has some difficulty getting the no, and so that is a stammer right off at the beginning of a word that should be pretty clear, but he has difficulty with it, even on a small level, causing a stammer. So along with that, right afterwards, he goes into a full flow of his constant stammering while reiterating the same thing. Definitely not. No, 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 no. All in all, this felt like a very overt attempt to direct attention away from that in a way that wasn't very convincing, because it's not using genuine tactics. It's using all of these tactics that appear to be red flags in his nonverbal communication. That's not great news, but by this point, I think that's kind of what all of us have found to expect from him now that we're at this point in the series. But let's go ahead and keep watching.
Definitely not. And I definitely did not visit his Palm Beach house 3 or 4 times a year. Absolutely not.
How many times would you say you visited?
In total, probably 4 times. In total, throughout the time that I knew him. In fact, probably that was the place that if you see what I mean, he was in the house more there than in other places that I was.
So that's where you'd find him.
Wow. Okay, so during this part, he's still holding to this, I've never hung out with Epstein ever before in my whole entire life. I've only been to this house of his maybe 3 or 4 times in my entire life. So in my mind, when I was listening to that, I was thinking, well, perhaps the house cleaner misstated and was like, oh, actually, I mixed it up and he's only been there 3 or 4 times total, not 3 or 4 times a month. And I'm not positive. I'm just not positive that that's the case there. I do find it interesting that there's that discrepancy with that similar number there. I doubt that it's really on the housekeeper's part, because the housekeeper doesn't really have too much to hide in this instance. However, Andrew kind of does. So in this area, with him still directing us away from it, there's no red flags outside of the stammering and stuttering and tenseness behind his voice that we've already noted. So we can't really hang on too much to that beyond that point, but it is still interesting that that's what he's noting, and now he's trying to redirect attention again. But let's just see how this goes.
But it was usually because I was going through and on somewhere else, so it was a day. That was it.
You said in your statement From the palace.
Yep.
At no time did I see, witness or suspect any suspicious behaviour.
Yep.
Virginia Roberts' legal team says you could not spend time around Epstein and not know what was going on. You could not spend time around Epstein and not know what was going on.
If you are somebody like me, then people behave in a subtly different way.
So he's nervous during this part. You can hear it even at the end where he's taking in a breath. He has a very shallow breath in there. By this point, it almost feels like I'm stubbornly not acknowledging how ridiculous this is, but I want to continue at least looking at it as cleanly as I can. So there is that possibility that he's having those difficulties because it is false, but I'm not so certain, and it doesn't fit in context. So let's keep watching.
You wouldn't, first of all, I'm not looking for it. That's the thing. Is if you're looking for it, then you might have suspected now, with the benefit of a huge amount of hindsight and a huge amount of analysis, you look back and you go, well, was that really?
A huge amount of hindsight and a huge amount of analysis may have brought him to come to the possible discovery that Epstein was a terrible human and that some of those people weren't there appropriately. Wow. He's a prominent figure, right? You know, like he was in charge of something. I mean, okay, that's fair. Perhaps he could not see it and he is treated differently because he is royalty, which is true. Royalty is definitely treated differently. Which is understandable. That one I'll give him. I'll give him that. I will not give him the unless after all of this intense analyzation and everything like that, then I finally figured out what was going on. I don't give him that benefit of the doubt. I do believe that he is simply trying to claim that it was very difficult to see, and his nonverbal communication isn't showing force or positivity behind or certainty behind his words. It's all centered around this stammering, stuttering, fragile tone and halts in his vocal patterns, which is all an indicator of uncertainty or at least intense psychological processing centered around this. That's an anomaly compared to other areas. So with all of that in mind, I don't necessarily believe that. Long story short, let's go.
The way that it was, or was I looking at it the wrong way? But you don't go into these places, you don't go to stay with people looking for that.
You could not spend time around him. That was what they said. You could not spend time around him and not know.
Look, the other aspect of this is that
he's pleading now. Big sigh, you can hear it waver in there. He's nervous, and then he has a very soft, choked look. He is desperately hanging on by just a teeny tiny thread here because she is doing a beautifully relentless job at hammering down at this, because so far, all of the answers that he has given have been completely inadequate. Non-verbally speaking, along with that, he has shown no force behind his half-assed answers, which means that we shouldn't really hold too much weight to them, take them at a grain of salt, and be ready to ask a lot of questions. That's all that we're getting so far in an instance where that's the last thing we want. You don't want to be like, oh, I really am curious if he's involved in something like sex trafficking. I'm curious. That shouldn't be a curiosity. The answer should just be an automatic no, definitely not. But we're left curious, and we're even left believing more so than that. Let's continue watching.
I live in an institution at Buckingham Palace which has members of staff walking around all the time. And I don't wish to appear grand, but there were a lot of people who were walking around Jeffrey Epstein's house. As far as I was aware, they were staff, they were people that were working for him or doing things. I, as it were, I interacted with them, if you want to say good morning, good afternoon, but I didn't, if you see what I mean, interact with them in a way that was, you know, what are you doing here, why are you here, what's going on?
But you'd notice if there were.
So he's getting a really uncomfortable feeling, even just trying to explain how he wasn't being very polite to the staff on hand, because he leads in with, I don't want to seem grand, but I'm grand is more or less what he wants to say. And so he goes and he dives off into this, once again, very, very weak explanation of, oh, I am just too important to look around at the people around me. And he has his head lowered the entire time and looking up out of the top of his eye. Again, this is one of those studying looks. He doesn't have his eyebrows pulled together and lowered to make it more of an angry kind of look. So with that, that is calculation. He's trying to see whether or not his answer is landing. Obviously, it's not landing because it's not really a solid answer, but he's hoping that he can sell something during this, and he's just not.
Hundreds of underage girls in Buckingham Palace,
God.
wouldn't you?
But you would notice if there were hundreds of underage girls in Jeffrey's house. Wasn't there. Not when I was there. Now, he may have changed his behaviour patterns in order for that not to be obvious to me. So I don't know. I mean, you're asking me to speculate on things that I just don't know about.
You seem utterly convinced you're telling the truth. Would you be willing to testify or give a statement under oath if you were asked?
Well, I'm like everybody else, and I would have to take all the legal advice that there was before I was to do that sort of thing. But if push came to shove and the legal advice was to do so, then I would be duty bound to do so.
During that time, what I will note when he's responding to that very important question, would you be willing to testify? The first thing that he does start doing is shaking his head no. Now, it is a broad movement, so it is a no shake. But even though it is a broad movement, it still is related to the no mentality that he is more or less projecting without saying. So he's saying, oh, I would have to go ahead and check all of the legal team, and it's just like, wow, okay. So if we just went ahead and muted that, what would you see quite clearly is just a person insistently telling you that they don't want to do something, even just by the head shake alone. That included, along with the other spikes in his nonverbal communication around there, with the stammering and stuttering that normally comes in. We can rest assured that he does not want to testify, and if he doesn't want to testify, the question is why? The only way that he wants to testify is if he's legally told to do so. So that's fascinating, still fascinating. Let's continue.
Because you've said there are many unanswered questions,
Yep.
Everyone affected wants closure. You would help to provide that closure?
If in the right circumstances, yes, I would, because I think there's just as much closure for me as there is for everybody else.
So now he's also trying to shift himself over into the realm of victimhood as well. And forgive me, I feel like he's anything but a victim. He also did not answer a positive, yes, I would like to bring light to things. He answers it in this weird, twisty, manipulative style where you can hear his wordplay coming in to try to wiggle out of admitting any possible prior knowledge to any of the incidents. So he's saying under vague instances, then yes, because also if you think about it, I also need closure too. And that's just letting us know that he's still trying to group himself with the victims in this area. And he's also not totally willing to just step up and help with the case. All of these are just fascinating things that we have to make note of.
And undoubtedly, some very strange and unpleasant activities have been going on. I'm afraid to say that I'm not the person who can shed light on it for a number of reasons. One of which is that I wasn't there long enough. If you go in for a day, 2 days at a time, it's quite easy, I'm led to believe, for those sorts of people to hide their activities.
Ooh, and there it is. It's quite easy, I'm led to believe. He had to throw that I'm led to believe part in there because he was about to say it's quite easy to hide those sorts of activities. I'm led to believe is an important phrase that he added on after he already started the sentence. It's quite easy. Shoot, I've started this sentence. I need to add this I'm led to believe in here. Now I'm going to continue it on. So it's just a little red flag. It's not necessarily he's obviously involved, but it is notable that that popped up. Let's continue watching.
For that period of time and then carry on when you're not there.
Virginia Roberts' lawyers, legal team, say that they've asked for a legal statement from you. There is an active FBI investigation now. Would you be willing to provide that?
Again, I'm bound by what my legal advisors tell me.
Epstein was found dead.
Yep.
In prison.
Yes.
In August of this year.
Yep.
What was your response on hearing that he'd died?
Shock.
Some people think that he didn't take his own life.
Well, there again, I'm not one to be able to answer that question. I believe that centers around something to do with
So that was all very quickly answered and shortly answered, which is a fascinating straying from his vocal baseline. It's very rare for him to answer very shortly and briefly with the yep, nope, those sorts of answers, those very brief ones. So in that brevity, that's very interesting. And then she asked, what was your response to his death? And it was an immediate shock. Again, one singular word. That's still straying from his baseline. And how quickly they came out and quickly he responded to those while maintaining this guarded out of the corner of his eye expression. He's holding on to something around that, either emotionally or psychologically, that's difficult to pin down. There's not a way to say what he's holding on to, but there is something else centered around that. Otherwise, he wouldn't have had such short, brief, little answers to that. And then he went on and she's bringing up this part about him possibly not having himself, and he starts laughing, saying that he's not the right person to ask about it. It's an odd response to even an acquaintance to be laughing about whether or not that acquaintance possibly did a terrible thing to themselves. So it's an inappropriate response, and considering the rest of the context, this isn't like a nervous or a grieving response. This is just interesting.
bone in his neck. As to whether or not, if you commit suicide, that bone breaks or something. But I'm afraid to say I'm not an expert. I have to take what the coroner says, and he has ruled that it was suicide. So
he's dead. His girlfriend, Ghislaine Maxwell, your old friend,
Yep.
was, victims say, complicit in his behaviour.
well, that bit I can't help you with because I've no idea.
Do you think that she has questions to answer about her role in this?
Well, in the same way that I have questions to answer, in the sense of what was I doing, and as I say, that I was there to my mind, be honourable and say to him, look, you've been convicted.
That interesting grimace where he, big deep breath, to my mind, that grimace of pain right in there before that, perhaps anger or frustration. There was something centered around that. I wonder why that little flash came up in there. But it did come out as he said that word there. So let's continue.
It would be incompatible for me to be seen with you. Unfortunately, somebody was standing around with a camera at the time and got a photograph of us. It's one of the very few photographs there are of us, but that was...
We don't care. You were... It was one of the very few. That is correct. That's very true. But if you're still going to hang on to that, then, I mean, we just have to revisit the, like, you visited across the globe in person, went on a walk in a park, stayed at his house multiple days to be able to tell him that you can't hang out with him anymore because he's a piece of trash human. Very, very believable, Andrew. Very believable. I believe you. I'm sure everybody believes you, obviously, as things have turned out.
That was the case. If there are questions that Ghislaine has to answer, that's her problem. I'm afraid I'm not in a position to be able to comment one way or the other.
When was your last contact with her?
It was earlier this year, funny enough, in the summer, in the spring, summer.
About what?
She was here doing some rally.
So even though he had by then been arrested and was facing charges of sex trafficking?
No. This was early spring, I think. It was long, because when was he arrested?
July.
No, it was before July.
And that was the last time?
Yeah.
No, it was before July. What a convenient date to have her give up. What time was it? April. Definitely before April. Like, poof! I was just thinking in my head that it was before April. So during this time, he goes to make a pretty bold, strong statement and then really backpedals with the I think, and then he double checks. So he obviously has no certainty actually. I'm not sure. Maybe there is some form of evidence that's directly contradicting him here as well, but that's not present here at least, so we just have to consider it to be a red flag.
Did you discuss Epstein at all then?
No. No, actually, funnily enough, no, not at all. There wasn't anything to discuss about him.
So he's using this funny enough part, and then he was going to say something else, and then he hesitates, and he releases to a no. And it's this question of where was he about to say, funny enough, story. But he says, funny enough, cut off, no. And with that, he's still maintaining the same confused expression, and he's having multiple postural changes in there, and his breathing has increased lightly as well. This is all just letting us know that he's very agitated around this area, and in context with the rest of the interview, it kind of does make sense as to why he is, because he has a lot of heat pointed on him from this point because of very valid reasonings, and his body language is just letting us see that he cannot hold himself together. It's insane.
Because he wasn't in the news. It wasn't, it was just, we'd moved on.
I want to talk about moving on now.
Oh, yeah, right, okay.
Epstein is dead.
Yes.
The women are now being heard.
Quite right.
Another laugh centered around Epstein's death. Why is Andrew laughing so much about this? Could it be because he's nervous? Maybe. Maybe that's it. I haven't seen that pop up. The only other time that I've seen Andrew laugh in this was it was a derisive laugh in response to the interviewer calling him out for an excuse that he was about to give. That was the only other time that I saw him laugh in this, and then the 2 times with this centered around Epstein side of things and his death. That's a fascinating pattern to make note of, just even numerically speaking. So I'm going to pay attention to that as we continue.
Quite rightly.
How do you move on from this?
Well, it's an interesting way of putting it. I'm carrying on with what I do. I have a number of things that I have been doing since 2011. They're pretty well organised, pretty successful, and so I'm carrying on and trying to improve those things that I'm already doing.
I wonder what effect all this has had on your close family. You've got daughters of your own.
It has been what I would describe as a constant sore in the family. We all knew him.
Dry mouth here. He's having a lot of difficulty centered around his family, specifically with his girls being brought into the picture, and understandably so. If you're a piece of garbage human, you should feel like a piece of garbage. So we hear him gulping in here, and he's breathing more excessively, and this is his fight or flight response kicking in a little bit more excessively, centered around this area. Dry mouth, quickened breath. He's ready for action. He's very nervous about this specific area. In context, it is still a red flag, but we're keeping mind of it as we continue forward.
And I think that if we have a conversation about it, we're all left with the same thing of what on earth happened? Well, how did he get to where he was? What did he do? How did he do it? And so it's just a constant sort of gnaw. I mean, this first came out in 2011.
So I might have misunderstood the interviewer here, but it was my opinion that she was asking more in regards to their dynamic and how they interact with him and how he's involved with all of this. That's what I believed the interviewer's point of the question to be. Andrew has been kind of steering it away from him and back onto Epstein and talking about how he with the rest of the family, which we know is not the case. The rest of the family has kind of shown that to be pretty clear by this point, and I don't think many people were buying it there. But he and the rest of the family were feeling odd about Epstein, a different person. When that's not the question. The question is, how do your family feel in regards to you and Epstein doing your things? It's a fascinating psychological thing that he's done here, a verbal distancing that he's made of himself and Epstein, yet again, despite the obvious evidence otherwise. Wow.
And it was a surprise to all of us because the photographs were published at a separate time to when I was there, and there was sort of a question about what was going on, and as a family we discussed it. And then in 2015, when the allegations were made in the deposition, there was a sort of this is the immediate family.
Another big gulp after that, rapid eye blink after that, and then a whole bunch of stuttering and stammering centered around the deposition. We now know all of these pile up to let us know that he's extremely and specifically nervous, centered around the deposition, and the testimonies from the people makes him very specifically nervous. Why is that in the context with everything else? There's been enough other things to make him nervous, and why is this making him nervous? It's a red flag. It's a question. We continue.
Not the wider family. The wider family couldn't be more supportive. But the immediate family, it was, well, what's all this about? And we all just, we're at a loss. So it's just...
Has the episode been damaging to the royal family?
We're at a loss. So it's just, he's looking away, he's coming in on himself, he's turning his body away a little bit there as well. And it's just showing that he's not comfortable being there. He doesn't want to be there. He's very nervous being there. And it's all centered around this and his response to the family and the deposition and everything else that came out. And now we can see why he was responding that way, because chances are at this moment, it wasn't as clean as he's trying to paint it out to be. Chances are there were a lot more heated emotions behind that, but you can't really convey that, especially in this style of interview. Not that it would have helped this case anyways, but I mean, let's keep going.
To Her Majesty the Queen.
I don't believe it's been damaging to the Queen at all. Has to me, and it's been a constant drip, if you see what I mean, in the background that people want to know. If I was in a position to be able to answer all these questions in a way that gave sensible answers, other than the ones that I've given that gave closure, then I'd love it. But I'm afraid I can't. I'm just not in a position to do so, because I'm just as much in the dark as many people.
I'm just as much. He does a lip compression in there as well as a dry swallow. I am just as much in the dark as many people. There's a big red flag around there. There's a spike in nonverbal activity. So I would be like, I don't know. I don't know if you're just as much in the dark as everybody else, or just as much of a victim as everybody else, or anything else that he's tried to paint himself out to be. And once again, this is hammered home by nonverbal communication.
How do you reconnect with the public then now?
But exactly what I'm doing, which is to use and to continue to work with pitch, to continue to work with idea and the things that I believe strongly in. I'm not somebody who does things in competition with people. Oddly, I do things in collaboration with people. So I want people to work together to come to.
He's the way that he's painted himself. He has done no wrong in his life, and his memory is just hot, nasty garbage, unless it specifically pertains to the layout of Epstein's house with the upstairs, which he's never been to, and the downstairs, which he only was at for a few days, and the pic. It is absurd. It's absurd to hear him talk about how amazing he perceives himself to be.
As it were, a solution to a bigger problem. And so we got a number of people working together, particularly in the education field, particularly and also in areas of government and what they are doing, so that we're bringing everybody together, so that we're all pushing in the same direction. An idea now does that. We've been going properly now for 2 years. We've got 3.5 million people who've got a badge. We've got 500,000, or just over 500,000 young people who are using the service, and I'm trying to think what else we've got, but it's well, it's designed for 7 to 14-year-olds in the United Kingdom, and it turns out it's done from 5 to 95 around the world. So it's being done in 100 countries now. So we're slightly on the catch up for this one.
I know we have to bring this to a close because we're running out of time. You've faced questions today on a very, very raw subject. There has never been an interview like this before. I wonder what that tells us about the way the royal family now confronts these difficult situations. Has there been a sea change?
I think that the problem that we face in the 21st century is social media. There is a whole range of things that you face now that you didn't face 25 years ago because it was just the print media. And I think that
You know, I'm not sure that Andrew was thinking that he would end up on this channel being a part of this when he was doing this, but by the love of God, I bet if he did, he would have tried even the smallest amount to receive some coaching. It's just, oh my goodness. Yes, Prince Andrew, you greatly benefited from having the only thing be pictures. Now that we have video, we realize that things aren't as nice for you. Oof.
To some extent, there is a thick skin that you have to have. And again, I'm not a confrontationalist myself. I would prefer to be able to, as it were, resolve things in a way that is sensible. And so choosing to, as it were, get out there and talk about these things, it's almost a mental health issue to some extent for me, in the sense that it's been nagging at my mind for a great many years. I know that I made the wrong judgment and I made the wrong decision, but I made the wrong decision and the wrong judgment, I believe, fundamentally for the right reasons, which is to say to somebody, I'm not going to see you again. And in fact, from that day forth, I was never in contact with him. The subsequent allegations are what I would describe as surprising, shocking, and a distraction. But that's, I mean, there are all sorts of things that are on the internet and out there in the public domain that we just sort of go, well, yeah, but I'm afraid this is, it just never happened.
You've talked about a thick skin.
He tries to divert attention again from it. There's a whole bunch of other stuff on the internet, but like this is, I mean, it just never happened. He's really trying to wrap up this interview as if he provided any solid reason for us to believe him throughout the entirety of the rest of the interview. He's like really trying to be like, you know, just when it boils down to it, like I've shown you today, never happened. And it's like, but you didn't show us. You proved nothing to anyone besides that you're maybe a little bit inept. You haven't proven innocence at all. Let's continue.
I wonder if you have any sense now of guilt, regret, or shame about any of your behaviour and your friendship with Epstein?
As far as Mr. Epstein is concerned, it was the wrong decision to go and see him in 2010. As far as my association with him was concerned, it had some seriously beneficial outcomes in areas that have nothing to do with what I would describe as what we're talking about today. On balance,
you can hear in his talking the clicking in his mouth as his mouth has gotten more dry. You can hear that clicking come in. That's an indicator, once again, of nervousness centered around Epstein that wasn't there just before that. So we know that his mouth just got dry, centered around Epstein and their relationship. And he's saying, you know, I'm pretty glad that I was friends with Epstein, except for that one time I shouldn't have gone. That's, I don't know, man, like Epstein, he wasn't like a really good human being, but okay.
Could I have avoided ever meeting him? Probably not, and that's because of my friendship with Ghislaine. It was inevitable that we would have come across each other. Do I regret the fact that he has quite obviously conducted himself in a manner unbecoming? Yes.
Unbecoming? He was a sex offender.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm being polite, in the sense that he was a sex offender.
He has a large difficulty saying that as well, just verbally speaking, which it's an uncomfortable thing to say, especially when you might be the one in question for it. I do find it interesting, again, that he's saying, oh, I don't know Epstein very well because I only know about Ghislaine. And then he's also like, but I don't know anything about Ghislaine either because I just don't remember or have anything to say about the stuff that she's navigating. That's her own problem. But, you know, it's just, it's amazing how many things that Andrew doesn't know in this interview. It's absolutely bonkers to me. Then at the very, very end there, in almost a way to counteract what he said, he has a difficulty holding gaze, and then he has a lip compression and a little flash of contempt in there as well. It's just fascinating.
But no, was I right in having him as a friend at the time? And bearing in mind this was some years before he was accused of being a sex offender. I don't think there was anything wrong then. The problem was the fact that once he had been convicted,
you stayed with him.
I stayed with him, and that's the bit that as it were, I kick myself for on a daily basis, because it was not something that was becoming of a member of the royal family.
There's an interesting one. I kick myself for on a daily basis. He laughs in that area, once again, letting us know that it's not super important to him. Perhaps it's even humorous to him, which was also centered around Epstein's death. A partial joke, which was a polite laugh. And then another part earlier on where it was centered around contempt. So now we're seeing this humor come up, letting him know. It seems to be almost centered around contempt for him. That would make sense in each individual context, given it could be contempt at the first one, could be contempt at the joke on the second one, could be contempt at the death of Epstein on this one, could be contempt here as well. So he does that, but then along with that, he leans back a little bit and you see his head shake a little bit. No, that would be more of a revealing, perhaps authentic flash, a nonverbal communication, and a possible point of desynchronization.
And we try and uphold the highest standards and practices, and I let the side down. Simple as that.
This interview has been exceptionally rare. You might not speak on this subject again. Is there anything you feel has been left unsaid that you would like to say now? No,
I don't think so. I think you've probably dragged out most of what is required, and I'm truly grateful for the opportunity that you've given me to be able to discuss this with you.
Your Royal Highness, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.
Wow, that was uncomfortable. You probably dragged out everything that was required. I mean, I'm actually a super good guy. I remembered that I've got to paint myself out to be saint-like in this interview. So if I say that you drug all the stuff out of me that you wanted in my aggressive way that I was going to, that wouldn't go so well. Wow, 3 parts to this interview, and each and every part just a dumpster fire in its own special way. Like I said, if you haven't watched the first 2 videos, I do suggest you go and watch those to get context for this one. Now, considering all 3 parts in their totality, my belief is, at the end of this, is that Prince Andrew was blowing smoke more or less the entire time. What exactly he was blowing smoke about is more difficult to say, and that's where other teams would be able to come in to take care of that information. But as far as this goes, we could say with a reasonable amount of certainty that he is not telling the truth, as shown not only by evidence, but also by the nonverbal communication that we were able to establish that's specific to him. If anything, Prince Andrew believes himself to be a very astounding human being. He thinks that he is very, very good and above most people around him. He tries to use his name to throw power around, to dissuade questioning. He dodges questions. He answers in ways that provide no answers. And all of these are not even remotely pushing us to believe him. All of these are things that you would pay attention to if somebody's being shady, perhaps being deceitful, and he's showing all of it. So with that kind of context in mind, awfully weird. And there should be some questions. There have been, and there are some answers. And that's what's happening now. So I hope you did enjoy this series. It was pretty long. I know that was a lot of an interview to go through, but it was just so chaotic all the way through. I really do appreciate you watching it. If you wanted to be able to hit like or anything like that, I welcome it. That being said, if you do want to be able to have me watch another video, another interview, another series, something along those lines, the comments are very, very helpful. I am trying to interact more with my comment section. Thank you so much for watching this video, but But without further ado, that's all that I've got for today. My name is Logan, and you have been oh so awesome, as you always are, and I will see you in the next video. Cheers, guys.